Hi, welcome to another episode. I am joined today by Nate Turner from 10 Speed. Hi, Nate. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Brian. How are you doing?
Well, thanks. If you can just give our listeners kind of a little bit of a primer on your background and marketing and all that kind of stuff, that'll help, and we'll get going.
Yeah, absolutely. I got into SEO first back in probably 2008 and worked for an agency for a while. Got really into startups and kind of all things startup marketing, and was able to get a role as the first marketer at Sprout Social back in 2011. Joined the company and really kind of helped build and scale the inbound engine, but kind of back before people called it product-led growth. And Had a tremendous experience there. About 8.5 years, grew to 100 million in revenue, IPO. I just learned a ton about scaling SaaS companies from that, and then from there left and did some consulting with a number of SaaS companies, kind of across all aspects of marketing. And then through that, sort of saw an opportunity to really be able to specifically help SaaS companies with content and SEO. Just saw there's continued need across a lot of the clients I had. So partnered up with former head of SEO I had working with me at Sprout Social, and we started that in 2020, and now have for the last couple of years have been working with SaaS companies primarily, a little bit some other B2B and B2C type of companies, and just kind of doing all things content and SEO for them to help them grow.
So, I guess one of the natural questions that I have out of the gate is, how is marketing for a SaaS company different than, let's say, for a conventional, or a conventional is probably not the right word, but a traditional, let's say, non-SaaS based company?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple things. I mean, first, you could discuss the delineation between venture backed and not, and sort of what that does to hiring, funding, budgets, all of that. But in terms of the purely the business model, I think there's a couple really big advantages. One is the recurring revenue and sort of the lifetime value that you get there. And two is typically SaaS companies have very strong margins. And so when you think about that, even compared to maybe a 80 to 90% gross margin for a SaaS company versus maybe 30% for an e-commerce company, you create a lot of opportunity to reinvest in the business out of your profits and do a lot. So I think that really does allow a lot of SaaS companies to put a lot more funding into their marketing and build some of that like marketing led growth. So I would say that's probably two of the big factors for sure.
So those margins, you talked about, a much higher gross margin. That informs the marketing kind of in what way specifically, just to kind of help contextualize that.
Yeah, I think just in general, you just have a lot more budget to put across there, and so I think that I think in my experience and working with the teams, it allows founders and marketers to be a little more creative and like what are all the things we should do and what are all the things we want to do, and maybe not as much of like a budget constrained. Okay, we can only do one thing. We have to really make it count and pick the most effective. So I think there's just more there. And so obviously not every company is massive marketing budgets and just doing whatever they want. But I think compared to a lot of, say a retail or e-commerce or, some other type of company like that, I think there's certainly a lot more opportunity. And therefore, that's why you see, paid marketing is sort of a very large category on its own across multiple channels and disciplines and conversion rate optimization and content marketing and SEO and brand. And, the list just kind of goes on. And there's a lot that kind of falls into that.
So the I guess the other sort of part of that conversation, and you alluded to it kind of earlier, was there's a difference when it's venture backed versus, I guess, when they're still in the bootstrapping phase or what have you. How does that play out in terms of the work that you're doing?
Yeah, I think that first of all, the non-venture backed, I think typically in the earlier stages does look a lot like maybe a bit more like a traditional business in that you're really the extent of what you have to invest is solely out of your profits, and there's no concept of burn rate and spending beyond that. And and running it. Typically, a venture backed business is unprofitable, for a period of time. And so I think that's probably the biggest thing is you do have some of those additional limitations and really forcing yourself to be maybe a bit more efficient than venture-backed companies, but also having to choose. And then I've also worked with a bootstrap company, in like a 20 to 30 million revenue range, and I think that that's when you do start. There's still like maybe a bit of a difference, and obviously not focused on cash burn, but like there's once you get to a higher level and the budgets start to get bigger, then I think it starts to feel a bit more similar to a venture-backed company as well. But I would say that's probably the biggest difference. And I'm very in favor of both. I mean, I'm not trying to imply a bias either way. I think that it's cool when you have bigger budgets and there's a lot of like stuff you can do and be really creative. And I think that the challenge of figuring out how to be efficient and creative on a smaller budget is also a really cool thing too.
So I imagine on the, I guess the Pareto side though, right? There's still the 80-20 on what's going to generate results and what doesn't. Is there consistency across the startup space that maybe not in the traditional space in terms of what works and what doesn't?
It's a good question. I would say the thing that immediately comes to mind is sort of that like free trial concept. I think that, and that's not necessarily a specific marketing tactic or channel, but like I think that's still fairly unique to the SaaS world and really an opportunity to be able to actually have people try it and start to build stuff and build see themselves using their tool, or sorry, using your tool. I think is probably a pretty big thing. And if you want to consider from, like you said, sort of the 80-20, I think that is one of the things that does have a big impact. But in terms of like channel or tactic, I don't know that I would have a specific answer off the top of my head.
Right. So that PLG kind of, the free trial that leads into then maybe a higher tiered offering and all that kind of stuff. That's been something that's been going on in this ever since the freemium days back.
Yeah.
We're talking about 20 years old now almost. That's terrifying.
Yeah.
But how, when it comes to marketing that, I mean, like, how does that work? Do you're directing traffic to like a free trial page? How does that go?
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the biggest distinctions is it a free trial or is there a free plan? And so like Squarespace is a great example where you sign up and you can, it's not limited to 14 days or 30 days. Like you have kind of as much time as you need to build a site, but you don't get to publish it until you're ready to pay. So that's, a pretty easy example. And obviously a lot of tools out there have a free plan that's limited. But then the other side of that is the trial. And so I think that becomes a distinction in terms of some of the tactics and what you're trying to get them to do. And I think, one of the things that in my years of doing it, whether it's premium aspect or the trial, there's a lot that goes into that on the product side in terms of, do you choose which plan to put them in? And if not, do you put them into like sort of the top plan or like just seeing everything? And then you have to kind of like, well, now that you want to pay, like you have to sort of downgrade the experience, or do you try to, like all of that balancing of how do you make sure they see all of the best parts and the things that they want to see without, having to feel like it gets taken away from them at the end, and some of that balance. But I would really, to, I guess, more specifically answer your question, I think there's, a number of ways that you're driving folks from other sites and from paid channels and attracting people to your own site through content and things like that kind of ultimately lead them down their process of buying. And the trial, something that we also saw over time was the trial more and more became sort of the last step or one of the last steps in their buying process versus how I think a lot of people thought was like, oh, they'll try it first and learn more. And like the reality is that they were actually educating themselves, narrowing down their list, even just from sort of publicly available information on like, well, this competitor is too expensive. This one doesn't have this integration. Now I've narrowed it down. Now I'm actually going to spend the time to set up a trial and use the product and make sort of a final decision. So yeah, there's a lot that you could just probably spend multiple episodes unpacking all all the nuance there for sure.
Well, I guess the thing that's really interesting to me is that there is there's got to be a strong interplay, particularly in these SaaS companies, between product and marketing. And so the go-to-market strategy sort of conversation about where do you introduce someone to a free trial versus
Yep.
the paid conversation has to inform the rest of the marketing process. How in the effective teams that you've worked in, how does that interplay go? I mean, are the founders, are they all, or the startups, are they all typically receptive to like a, hey, we can't get there from here with the marketing? Or how does that kind of, I guess, that interplay between product and marketing work from a sort of tactical perspective?
Yeah, I think at the earlier stages, it's certainly a bit more loose and it's sort of earlier, resource constrained, maybe not have like as much tracking and data available. Like whether it's on the marketing side or the product side, someone spend some time analyzing kind of what's working, what's not, or identifying stuff. But I think the teams that function well evolve appropriately over time and have like there's a very big product component, and there it doesn't make sense to expect marketing in a product-led growth company to be fully driving the product side because it ultimately becomes very much like any other part of a product with product managers and all of the work and engineering and design, UX, and everything that goes into that. And so I think that the biggest thing is just a good balance between the two, and where you have good product fundamentals and the product team also understands, yes, this is sign up, yes, this is onboarding, but we are paying attention to what happens beyond that and understanding how that flows into the paid account and like growth over time to make sure they're, because at the end of the day, it's not just about the trial signups. It's not even about the initial conversion. It's about having that customer for 24, 36 months. And so making the product team, I think, is better at understanding that through line to a long-term customer, and marketing has more insights into, well, here's the channels, here's the tactics that actually bring us the quality people that will stay around. Because similarly, marketing can sort of game signups and drive trial numbers way up, but then they're not converting or not. So I think, like I said, it's relationship and clearly defined roles and letting the teams kind of play to their strengths while working together well.
That's really really interesting. I love that dynamic. In the places where it's working well, what does that interaction look like? Right? Or is that kind of who's running that meeting and how does it work?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's I think like head of growth or chief growth officer type of role, I think has really evolved in the last several years to be someone who understands both the marketing side and the product side. And there may be not like there's probably still a CMO or VP of marketing that's like really handling a lot of brand and life cycle and customer marketing, all kinds of other marketing stuff. But in terms of that like truly acquisition intersection, I think that typically would be the role we're seeing now. In my experience, we didn't necessarily have that, but it was myself kind of representing marketing acquisition, and then sort of a growth product person, and we planned together, led meetings together, and all that stuff.
So as a third party provider for a lot of that sort of conversation in many ways, how how is it that how do you integrate with the client's sort of extant programs and where they need to go? How do you get kind of over that gap?
Yeah, I would say, you're asking about 10 speed specifically?
Yeah, yeah, sure.
Yeah. I think most of the time we're pretty squarely on the marketing side, and aligning with what I mentioned before, which is marketing's focus is bringing the right people into the trial. And so that's very much because of the experiences that we've had, understanding like it's not just about getting any and all organic traffic and signups. It's who is your actual ICP, and working with clients and understanding like, okay, but of your customers, what are the verticals or use cases that are the most profitable for you that we can use to inform topic selection and some of that, to really make sure that we continue to build towards that and saying, hey, we're not just driving traffic, we're bringing in the ideal folks that you want to be going through that. So we don't typically have to interface too much with sort of that relationship between marketing and product on kind of a growth aspect, but what we're doing definitely plays into it quite a bit.
Gotcha. So your typical engagements, are you just basically a dotted line to product, or not even that? I mean, how does that, again, as a third party provider, given that the tightness of that interaction, or the tightness, the sort of implied required interplay there, how do you deal with that just broadly?
Yeah, it's I mean, we definitely have some product folks that get involved, or at least kind of join monthly calls. So there's, I think, kind of a variance. And the thing that's just wild really is like, as much as people sort of feel like, okay, we kind of understand how like a SaaS marketing team or, a SaaS company would be structured and the roles you would have. The reality is just, day in and day out of talking to prospects and clients and everything, like title, like the same title across 10 companies, job title could really have wildly different responsibilities, and even their own skill sets and their experience can be varied. And so that's where it really kind of compounds into the complexity of, it's not always a head of marketing. It's not always a demand gen person. It's not always, a content marketer. Like those vary significantly. And so sometimes even the marketers we're working with are a bit more of that growth person that is also working on some of the product side and whatnot. And so, it definitely varies, but I think, like you said, the most important part is understanding the details from the client and what's really working and what's a priority for them, so that we can kind of help facilitate that and bring more of that to them.
Gotcha. So just I guess a fun kind of question. Have you ever started the marketing conversation with a product just isn't going to go?
Yes. Yeah. Well, a product isn't going to go as in like
the offering. More accurately, you start down the path. The marketing, the marketing seems to be performant, but the product itself is at best.
Yeah, definitely. I think mostly,
you don't have to name names.
No. Yeah. We try to weed those out before we actually start working with them. So I think that's typically, but in that process, definitely run into that a lot. We're kind of like, I don't know. One, like none of us even understand what you say you're doing. Not like that it's too technical, but just sort of product marketing is all over. But we also, like, early on, we worked with a couple like pre-product companies because they were just gung-ho to get started and wanted to build for the long term, but they were pre-product, and we don't do that anymore. And really try to kind of coax out more details to understand that they already have product market fit. Like they're consistently getting, new subscribers, like some of those details that help us understand, like, this is resonating with their ideal target audience, and we can help build towards that. Because yes, it happens all the time. I mean, the sheer number of companies being started and whatnot, like it's bound to happen that there's going to be folks that the product isn't great, or it just doesn't like they're who they think their target audience is. It isn't them, or it's a bad experience and people are churning, like all kinds of stuff.
And how do you break that news to the client?
I think, we only get so much information, so I don't ever feel that it's my place to fully say like,
by the way, your stuff is garbage.
Yeah. because there could be other stuff that's a factor that I don't understand or whatnot, but ultimately just kind of try to explain that I don't think it's a fit for what we do, and or it's too early, and why don't you circle back when you've got more customers and a little more concrete use cases and that kind of stuff. But yeah, at the end of the day, it's just sometimes it's just my opinion on that aspect, and I don't put too much value in that. So
Yeah. That's it's we've been talking a fair amount about that interplay between product and marketing and making sure that that's tight, and then you get in these situations where that interconnection is not there, or in the context of what you're doing, it's a third party exchange, and so you've got revenue on the table for your organization, and at the same time you're trying to push water uphill with this, and it's not working. So being able to come back and have those conversations has got to be sort of central to like your make it or break it point, particularly working with startups. Is there a key inflection point? Like if it's not working in 3, 6, 9 months or whatever, then you guys push back and say, yeah, this isn't a fit, or we're not gonna be able to get you where you need to be?
Yeah, we certainly don't have a set time, but I think it's something we're always conscious of, that we want to, if it feels like there's enough things kind of building up to where maybe expectations have shifted over time or things like that, that we always want to be upfront and transparent, and first I think it's typically like, hey, this seems like maybe there's less alignment now than there was before, or let's kind of get together and just talk through it. And half the time it's well, this new person came in the company and sort of changing things, and so now like we did nothing to change, but like the lens in which things are perceived has changed internally, or definitely went through that a lot in 2022 with the number of folks that had layoffs and budget cuts and some of that. Like ultimately things just were viewed through a different lens than when we started. But I think that's definitely a big part of what we focus on over time, is just making sure that we have that. And sometimes if it's a CEO who's not involved, then we can get them to kind of get that person on the call and just talk through. And sometimes it's a small thing that's kind of grown into a big thing, and you can address that and move on. And sometimes it just isn't a fit anymore. And we had one company we talked to, and we're doing that, and they were a bit more on the consumer side, and it was like, yeah, like this might work, but like you should just go do like influencer marketing will probably do really, really well for this product. And this is a bit more of like a newer, unsought good kind of thing that like, we can still do some stuff from a search perspective, but it's a very visual thing. Like seeing someone use it, like influencer marketing will probably be substantially better, and come back to us in 2 years and we'll kind of help you build a new channel then, or, something like that. So yeah, I think there's a lot that happens over time, but always a good conversation to have and things to be mindful of.
Mm. All right, Nate, tell us a little bit about who's a good fit for 10 speed, and kind of what your ICP looks like, so that any of the folks listening that might be looking for what you got can learn a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. So we do work with kind of early stage and growth stage startups. So seed to Series D, really. The main things we typically look for is like it's a product and a company that fits well in terms of there's a lot of topics we can educate folks on. They want to like understand and learn and educate themselves through content that makes sense as written content. So I realize that's kind of a bit complex, but there are certainly things that for some companies are just better in video format or things like that, and some things that are really meant to be broken down, and people will be researching and educating themselves. So a few of the factors we look for there, but we'd love to see at least one full-time marketer on the team, sometimes at least a marketer and a content marketer. So we work with teams from a marketing team of 1 up through, I think the largest is 40 people. And so we're really trying to just jump in with a company that has a desire and that need and the opportunity. And we really focus on that intersection of content marketing and SEO, going pretty deep on the SEO side in terms of technical, on-site, all that. And then that allows typically the in-house team to do some of the stuff that would be a bit more involved to outsource, like webinars, case studies, like some of those things that content types that they can do, or campaigns they could be focused on, channels. And we really kind of drive, everything from strategy, execution, all of that for that area. So, so I would say, early stage companies, typically a small team, and then the larger stage, we're kind of augmenting. Things are working, they want to move faster, and we'll kind of join and augment that team. And then the three big areas I would say we typically help companies. One is just sort of the proven strategy framework that we have. So kind of skipping for teams that want to like skip the trial and error and really just kind of jump right in and work with what they know will get results. Second is the bandwidth aspect. So early stage companies always struggle with bandwidth. And then, as I said, even larger companies, we can kind of help augment. And then lastly, it's just we focus on kind of getting the most out of their content. And so for companies that have content, but it's not performing like they would like it to be, or companies that need to just get a lot out of the time spent on that content, we really work well there. So I'd say that's kind of the three main things that we help.
Gotcha. So in your journey to get to where you are now, what are the three biggest bits of knowledge you picked up along the way?
One I would say is like focusing on impacting core company metrics. A lot of marketers can kind of get distracted with sort of their craft or measuring specifically what they're doing, which is where, in the past has sort of led to like, but look at all the MQLs we generated, or, look at all the social followers we got gained. And not that those things are bad, but as the end goal, they're bad. So I think really understanding revenue and, some of the other core company metrics and being able to speak to how your work impacts that. And if you don't know, then figuring that out, because that's just a useful thing. So I would say that's definitely a big one. I think second is probably just really, I don't think you can ever have too much time spent or effort around understanding your customer and your target audience and what matters to them and how your product actually helps solve their pain points or make their life easier or whatever it is. Because I think we can tend to make some assumptions, and the more you just continuously, founders are great about talking to customers in the first year. But then I think over time that can kind of fade from the company culture. So talking to customers, I think is another really big one. And a third one, I don't really know how to word it. It's sort of like managing things like your own, like it's your own, whether you truly did start a company like me, or in-house role. Like, I think there's just a lot to taking ownership and not being like, well, whatever, we raised 70 million, last year, like company has money, but like really kind of digging in and understand and making sure that the investments go as far as you would like them to go if it was your money.
Awesome. Thanks for being on the show today, Nate. I really appreciate your insight. And please be sure to circle back if you come up with some new and interesting stuff.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks, Brian. Thanks for having me.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Consulting Trap. If you have suggestions for future episodes or would like to be a guest on our show, please send me an email at brian@podcastchef.com. That's BRIAN at podcastchef.com. Before we go, we'd like to thank the sponsor of our show, Podcast Chef. Podcast Chef helps turn ordinary podcasting into a revenue-generating lead magnet for your consulting business. Our Podcasting Done For You service takes away the headache of starting up and running your own podcast. Reach out now to take advantage of our 30-day money-back guarantee. Visit us at podcastchef.com to find out how our team of experts can help you leverage podcasting to take your business to the next level.